Mr. Ali Aslan, international TV presenter and journalist from Germany. And over to you, Natalie.
Hello?
One, two, three. 1, 2, 3. Here it's working.
1, 2, 3.
It has to do with me. Now it works. So, ladies and gentlemen, our global order is in churn. Global order, global disorder, we will now find out. But let me perhaps start off, as an Italian, by giving you Antonio Gramscian definition of what this churn is about. The old is dying, the new is yet to be born, and in what is in between the old and the new is the time of monsters. Now, that may be a Gramscian definition. It may also be perhaps a slightly European view, and I'm sure that we're going to be hearing different takes on what this churn is about, not all of which are necessarily that pessimistic, but I think there are at least 3 sets of issues which really point to this churn, which I think may be interesting to take and perhaps elaborate a little bit in the course of this discussion. The first is the idea that this global churn has to do, and I think this has already come up in discussions, with a global shift in power which is giving rise to global rivalries. And it is very clear that there are a number of conflicts, tensions, or wars that are very much the product of these global rivalries. One only needs to think of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or one can think about the growing tensions in East Asia, over the South China Sea, over Taiwan, to really highlight the fact that many of these monsters that we're talking about have to do with global rivalries. I think a second set of issues is really the conflicts, tensions, or problems, or perhaps not, that are the result, and this is of course related to the first point that I'm making, but the end of what we could define as Pax Americana, right? Now, on the one hand, there is a relative retreat of the United States, which in and of itself does not necessarily have to be a bad thing. The problem becomes when no one really steps in the void instead. And I think if one thinks about the situation, for example, in the Middle East, in different corners of Africa, it is clear that essentially what we're seeing is a world in which no one is really in charge, right? I mean, there is a global power that is no longer playing the role that it once did, but no one else is really taking much of a responsibility. And then I think a third set of issues really has to do with, on the one hand, this fraying multilateral order, which makes it increasingly difficult to reach common solutions to what are, by definition, transnational problems, whether this is climate change, whether this is the challenges that emerge from technology, of course, pandemics, food security, etc. So there are, I think, at least these three sets of monsters, which I think would be important to discuss over the course of the next hour, and to do so looking at it from perhaps the different vantage point of the people represented on this panel. Essentially, we have representatives that are from big countries, medium countries, and small countries, representatives from different geographies, but also both official and unofficial speakers. So I think there's a sort of fantastic mix. We don't have a lot of time, and what I really wanted to do is make sure that we have a bit of a discussion, but perhaps for the first time actually have a discussion with all of you. So without further ado, let me perhaps start off with Zorab, with you, asking you, on the one hand, how you would describe this churn, and perhaps describing this churn by looking at the nexus between, on the one hand, the churn within your country and region, and how the regional churn, in a sense, in Armenia and the Caucasus, interlocks with this broader global churn that we're talking about. Zorab.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Well, first of all, I just want to commend and congratulate the Foreign Minister of Armenia and the partnership they've built with our Indian friends to launch this first Yerevan dialogue, and I very much hope and wish that it has a good continuation in the future. Now, going back to what we're trying to figure out now about the world, I think one indispensable and unavoidable unfortunate condition in policy planning and in policy formulation is conjecture and fluidity. Not everything is known or available to policy planners, and the uncertainties are always present. There seems to be a consensus about the kind of world we live in. You have already, framed it. Even the United Nations Secretary General, usually an optimist, was not so much an optimist in his latest report last year. We all seem to agree that we all go through a time of transition, and we live in a fractured and fragmented world. We are in perhaps a prolonged period of transition from one thing to another. One thing we more or less agree, the other thing I don't really feel there is a overwhelming agreement on where we're moving. The overwhelming view is that the multipolar world is awaiting us. There are still others who would argue that given the significant concentration of power in the hands of the United States, we are in a partial unipolar world. The others would rather say that in light of the rising power in China, we are in a bipolar world. Whichever world we're moving, the key word here is polar and the pole. Someone today mentioned the aspiration towards a post-polar world. I think that's an idea that requires some more thinking. But whichever world is a polar world, which implies poles, which implies centers of gravity, which implies big states, those who have a significantly large share of power in the distribution of power, and also, in fact, capacity to deliver global goods or global threats. In that configuration, the multiple, this is not something I think that is happening, that we, the humanity, are facing for the first time. The presence of big states perhaps is part of the human history, unavoidable part. And those big states with their centers of gravity, they create their circles to maximize sustained power, and circles become may come in collisions, as, again, history has given too much context to us. And those collision points are the fault lines. And the fault lines are the most terrifying thing for those who are in the periphery, small states, the small vulnerable states, even more vulnerable. The medium-sized states are not also immune from these collisions. So that's, I think, is what concerns us most as a small state, because again, the historical context gives us significant number, a list of examples when we're all we're all victims of the definition of global security. What is global security? The one defined by the big states is the state, a condition in the world where the big powers are not colliding, are not in a major military confrontation. Right? Is it a condition good enough for the smaller states? Because to sustain such global stability, small states often run the risks of becoming bargaining chips, becoming small change in big transactions of the bigger powers to sustain global security. This is where, I think the concerns are. From the specific angle of Armenia, I think we have two levels of transition. The first level is the global one, and we're not immune from that. The second one is also the reality of the region. This is a region which has three actual participants, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, members of the region, and three regional powers, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, who are in historical competition for influence, for power projection in this region. And I think that is also in transition in this region. So we are facing this dual risk, dual challenge of transition, which amplifies the risks and amplifies the needs for stronger capacities for resilience and survival. Thank you.
Thank you, Sorab. And perhaps, Susie, turning to you, if you could reflect on some of these points that Sorab was making, but as they apply to your country and region. In particular, I think he was making very powerful points on the one hand of the very contradictory state of the churn, right? I mean, there's uni, bi, multi, non-polar, all at once, basically. This tension between the big and the small in this, which obviously exists by definition, but in this particular context, but also this notion of the double transition, right? Because even in an African context, there is an intra-African transition which is playing out within this broader global churn. Susie.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the organization for inviting me and also by congratulating them for this high-level dialogue. Concerning Africa, concerning Guinea-Bissau, my country, which is part of the ECOWAS, I would say that we are also being part of this revolution of this new formation of the global area. Let me tell you that the world has changed, I think everybody has realized, but it has changed more after COVID-19, after the crisis Russia-Ukraine. And for us, even though we are far, you would say, it doesn't affect you much, but it does. We have realized how dependent we were of the relations we had with Europe or with the Western countries. And this made us, as small countries, in the case of Guinea-Bissau, start trying to find new solutions by taking part in different international organizations, betting in multilateralism as a way of defense. In some of our countries, I may say Sierra Leone, even Nigeria, which is the biggest country in our sub-region, we started feeling the impacts of this war. A war that's so far from us in another continent, but we are living daily the effects because the prices have increased so much. The population came to the street claiming and making manifestations against huge prices that we were paying because of this changes in Europe. So the decision was, we are small countries, yes. I'm not speaking, of course, of Nigeria, which is a giant in Africa, but small countries, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and other countries from our sub-region started to say we have to bet in multilateralism in order to defend our ideas. And this is what we're doing now. We are members of different regional organizations, of multilateral organizations, in order to defend our interests and our ideas. One of the main targets we have is to take part of the Security Council, because it's not fair in the world we live with countries like Nigeria or Kenya that are really having a really high technology transformation, very important impact, even in the world's economy. We are not part of the Security Council till today. Why? So this is part of the fight we're doing to make this new global order happen, because we do have to have a voice. Even though we are small, we are 54 countries, and we do make a difference, and we think it's the time for us to be strong by unifying each other and by supporting each other to be also part of this new global era. In a way, what I would say to the small countries, and what I would say to the African countries in general, not only from the ECOWAS, it's very important to be part of this multilateral organization, because alone we don't have the strength of a huge country. I would say also it's important to see what's happening now with the formation of the BRICS. The BRICS are countries that a few years ago were not taken in consideration. Now we have Brazil, India, China, South Africa being one of the leaders of the world. This is thanks to this multilateralism, and I think this would be the best answer for us small countries for the new global area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. And this reminds me of something that I often say, also looking at it from a European perspective. You know, we are small chicken in a jungle, right? So we either stick together or a small chicken in a jungle does not last for a long time. But here we have someone who is not a chicken. Because, of course, Manish comes from, you know, here we've firstly heard from two small countries, but then moving on to India, more like an elephant, let me say. Not only an elephant, but also an elephant which, you know, whereas I started off from, in a sense, a rather, you know, dreary European view of the churn, in many respects, India has been, is, and probably will be, one of the winners from this churn. So perhaps, Manish, if you could give us your perspective of what the churn looks like and essentially where you think we're headed.
Well, first of all, Sally, thanks for the elephant, not the rooster. But may I take this opportunity of thanking both the government of Armenia and the Observer Research Foundation for hosting the Yerevan Dialogue and inviting all of us here. With your permission, if we could step back a little, because there are two words in this topic which have a very significant import, especially in today's context and in the context of this discussion. The first is global, and the second is order. When we were growing up, in our geography class, there used to be a globe. The globe used to have countries around it. And the raison d'etre of each country, acting in its best self-interest, created a certain order of things. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is whether the globe is really the world today. And the answer is no. For the simple reason that the Internet was the most audacious experiment in anarchy, and it has succeeded. It represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before in the history of humankind has so much power concurrently resided in so many fingertips. There's more data which is churned out today, every day, than from the dawn of civilization till the turn of the third millennium. So what you have is a brick and mortar civilization which had evolved over thousands of years, and a virtual civilization which is evolving. And the future of humankind actually lies at the intersection of these two civilizations. And that's represented in the way we spend our day. We might live in the physical space, but we spend a substantive part of our working day in the virtual space. So therefore, when you talk about globe or a global order, you're really talking about a Westphalian construct, which is completely and absolutely antiquated, fossilized, and outdated. And so therefore, I think you really need to reimagine the global context and its implications in the perspective of the many civilizations we seem to inhabit at the same time. Then, coming to order. Well, whose order? For whom? And created by whom? And it is to order whom? Because the global order that we talk about is fundamentally a European construct. Going back to the peace of Westphalia in 1648, or the Concert of Europe, or the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, the unipolarity, and the state of flux from 2001 onwards, it really has been a European construct. And so therefore, when you talk about a rules-based order, who makes those rules? And those rules, and who is the rule taker, and who's the rule giver? I think there are certain fundamental concepts which need to be redefined. You know, before we start looking at the building blocks or what a new global order would really look like, you have to take within its sweep the huge technological changes which have taken place: artificial intelligence, robotics, genomics, and biotechnology, and all the other sunrise areas which are creating an alternative civilization. And so therefore, under those circumstances, we still are fixed on the very narrow notion of a global order. So what really inhabits our mind space as we speak is that for the first time after the end of the Second World War, you have three parallel conflicts and three continents playing themselves out. So you have the Russia-Ukraine war going back to 2022. You have the Israel-Hamas situation going back to the October of 2023. And you have the rise of China over the past 2 decades, which by no means has been peaceful. If you look at North Asia, or if you look at the ASEAN region, or if you even look at South Asia. So under those circumstances, I think there is a fundamental need to rethink both these constructs. One, what is the world today? And number two, before we start creating a new order, as we are in the age of monsters, which are the monsters that we really have to tie down? And I'll stop at that.
Absolutely. Zoran, let me turn to you from the elephant back to the chicken. But also, I mean, you know, reflecting on, I think, some of the points that Manish was making, because I think he was making these sort of fairly powerful points with which I totally agree, that in a sense the order, which is now in churn, was a European order. Of course, a European order that a country like yours, North Macedonia, has been both subject and object in. So perhaps reflect a little bit, looking at it from your vantage point.
Okay, let me first thank you for inviting me on this great forum, actually, the Erevan Dialogue. I would like to say that, first of all, there were two seminal books in the turn of the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which were written on the global level. One was the Francis Fukuyama's The End of History, which talked about the liberal democracy being one of the ultimate regime. which will be established in all over the world, and it will be a sort of peace and paradise. And the other book was the Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, which advocated that that war is a second nature of a manhood, and there are many hotspots in the world where the ethnic tensions thrive, and there will be wars between civilizations. And somehow, looking upon these books 30 years after, we see that Huntington was closer what was going on the geopolitical scene on the level of the world, actually. That the things like identity, territory, blood, and ethnic identity, ethnic tensions are, and also lust for territory, the imperialism of some big powers is actually more powerful than the lust of the people for democracy or establishing economic viable states and prosperity and prospective states. So looking for that point of view, it seems like the countries that are smaller, for instance, North Macedonia, we changed the name in order to become candidates for the European Union and to become members of NATO. And it was an identity issue. And so we called ourselves Macedonia because it is the whole region it is. But it was we were the only state that called itself Macedonia. There was no other state. There is a territory in Greece, of course. And we should have made alliances. So my point is that our actually approach was to make alliances. We became candidates for European Union and became members of NATO. So countries in Europe are maybe either happier than these countries in other places of the world that can still be members of European Union one day. They plan to become members. We'll see how it develops. But generally speaking, if you see these three, there are things that are repeating. For instance, Balkan, Caucasus, and Middle East. These are three hotspots for last, let's say, hundreds of years that have been war-torn. Ethnic tensions all over the time. Big powers. We see in Balkans, for instance, big alliances are there, but also NATO and European Union, but also the powers from, let's say, Russia, China, meddling in the region. Everybody has a say in it. It's the same with Caucasus. It's the same with the Middle East. In the Middle East we have Arab countries, Iran, etc., Israel. So I think what will shape the new world order, actually, we see on the other hand the global south, the BRICS countries. What will shape the new world order is again a power. And now we are in the time of the big powers stepping up and measuring their power. And in the end, actually in the close future, we will see that this power will be somehow balanced, and hopefully the new world order will get closer to peaceful solution and the dialogue more than turning into war all of these regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoran. And Zig, let me turn to you for a Polish perspective, but perhaps, given that actually, surprisingly, we haven't talked a lot about this up until now, if you could perhaps give us your reflections on one particular aspect of the churn, which obviously is Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and relate it to, some of these bigger global shifts. And in particular, if you could also reflect on one point that was made not in the previous panel, but I think in the panel before that, I can't now exactly remember who said this, but someone said, there are only two players that could actually end this war, and that is the United States and China, which I think kind of reflects, some of the issues that we're talking about. So perhaps we can reflect on that particular question as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. I come from Poland, a country of dialogue. So I think the right place, Europe and dialogue, a country of solidarity movement where via dialogue we achieved a chance for a transition of power from communism to democratic country. And the last 30 years proven that it's a successful story. We outnumbered all our neighbors from Europe, and even in 2008 Poland was a GDP growth positive during the financial crisis globally. Right now I can be very proud of my country, and I'm very happy of it, but there are concerns. We are building the second largest army in Europe. We are building the third largest army in NATO, US, Turkey, Poland. There is a reason for that. And unfortunately, the reason for that is that we are living at very important and, in my opinion, pivotal moment for global stability, or at least at Euro-Asian stability, because our neighbor, Russian Federation, decided to challenge not only its neighbor, Ukraine, by aggressive attack and declaring war, because it's a war from the 2014, but to challenge the whole community of democratic countries. In Ukraine, we are facing conventional front of this war. In all our democratic countries, we are facing a hybrid challenge dedicated towards influencing our societies. And this is a lesson. This is a lesson not only for democracies which are strong and still suffer. Look at the elections in the United States. Look at the Brexit in the United Kingdom. All of the secret services declared that there was a foreign influence on their electorate processes. This is very concerning, but as effective as a military aggression. And this is something what is a lesson for us. And being here in Yerevan, in Armenia, it's also a pivotal moment. It's a very important moment, in my opinion, but also a very fragile moment. I'm a sailor. When you make a turn, there is this momentum where you can return or you can cross the wind. And I think this is right now, but you can make a turnover. And I think that we need to support Armenia in their choice to join a community of democratic countries, because they already declared it, that they want to join. But price might come. And right now we need to support Armenia, and I encourage Armenian authorities, I was speaking about it with the minister yesterday, to be very brave in announcing those cooperation with other partners, that they want to belong to Euro-Atlantic community. But you asked me about China. I had a number of visits to DC to advocate for American support to Ukraine. And I was honestly surprised how many American politicians are not aware that the consequences of Ukraine as a failed state will have tremendous consequences globally. Because it will be a proof that Ukraine will be abandoned in some sense, that the United States cannot protect the countries that they promise that they will protect. And the consequence will be that the Pax Americana that Natalie mentioned in the beginning will collapse. But I'm not sure if it will be a good. I believe that people want to live in peace, and people don't want to be ruled by authoritarian regimes. Therefore, they struggle to have democratic future. And if we will allow right now a bully, in this case it's the Russian Federation, to go away without a price, every other bully in every corner of the globe will challenge its neighbor if they are only stronger, and this argument. So I prefer myself rule of law than rule of power. And China is learning from the crisis, from the war in Ukraine. And if Ukraine will fail, we'll have a next crisis very soon around Taiwan. And it will have tremendous consequences. I'm sorry to be a bit pessimistic, but about the consequences. But I still believe we as the international community will be enough brave to defend our values, like sovereignty, but also believe that people have a freedom of choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigyn. We'll come back to this point. Ali, let me turn to you. So, in many respects, you normally stand in this position, right? And you travel the world, panels like this, moderating people like these, and so you're kind of, you live the churn, right? So I'm wondering, in a sense, the question to you is somewhat same and different compared to others, because rather than reflecting from one particular region or thematic area, I'm really wondering if you could kind of reflect on this question by looking at it as how you've observed it, and as I said, in discussions like these around the world, developing, what is this churn that we're talking about, and that in different ways, it's like, again, going back to elephants, right, touching parts of the animal in darkness and not quite figuring the entire shape. How do you see the shape of this churn evolving?
Thank you so much. And indeed, first and foremost, I want to congratulate the Armenian Foreign Ministry and the ORF for this inaugural edition of the Yerevan Dialogue. Wonderful job that they've been doing. And thank you so much to our gracious Armenian hosts. This is my very first time in this country, and I couldn't be more delighted. And thank you for their hospitality. Natalie, you're absolutely correct. Usually those who know me here in the audience know I'm usually sitting at the other end of the spectrum and asking the question. I would even argue that the audio system in the beginning was so confused that I'm not the moderator. That your microphone...
That's why my mic is not working.
Your microphone did not work, because they're like, this cannot be right. But you're right, of course, Natalie. Usually, as somebody who has been moderating and interviewing heads of state, prime minister, president, CEOs, global newsmakers for over 2 decades, really, you do get a glimpse of what is moving and shaking, if you will, on the thoughts of the people. What I, as I believe the only journalist here on this panel, of course, bemoan a little bit, and I think some of you might be able to sympathize, is that we are living in extremely enraged times. We are enraged 24/7, and of course media and social media here play a very, very pivotal role. You know the famous saying, of course, enragement equals engagement, and there's a clear business model for that. Politicians such as yourself here on the stage, you are often find yourself, of course, at the other side of the spectrum, where people voice their displeasure, to put it diplomatically, in your tweets or below your tweets. And I think I don't have the answer, obviously, how to scale it back, because I think the Pandora's box has been opened, the social media aspect, and its tremendous impact has already been rightly touched upon by Manish here on this stage. But we are living in extremely politicized times, and I see this whenever I speak with friends off stage. Usually, those were pretty harmless conversations about where one stands on a certain political subject matter. Now I do see whether, how you stand on certain political subject matters, that it affects friendships as well. And the point I think I'm trying to make is I don't know how to scale down the temperature, to be quite honest, because whenever I do go on stage and whenever I do speak to the distinguished heads of state and so on and so forth, you can have a 60-minute civilized debate here as this one, but whatever ends up on TikTok or Instagram or whatever is that one tiny clip that will go viral. And I think that's a very, very dangerous development. I mean, look at it, Natalie. Tomorrow night or tonight, depending on which time zone you're in, we're going to have a US presidential debate, a very, very consequential one. And already I can tell you that when you wake up tomorrow, because it's probably too late for us to watch it online, some of you political animals out here in the audience, they will stay up. I won't. I will get up in the morning and I will look at my social media and I will get 20 10-second clips about how Donald Trump said something and Kamala Harris said something, and completely the content of what we ought to be discussing in times like these will get lost. There are 40 million, nearly 40 million Americans that live in poverty who I'm sure would like to hear from the two presidential candidates about how to solve the lack of income equality, about how to battle these issues, about how to have an impact that trickles down to their own personal lives. Instead, what you and I will end up with is, most likely than not, Donald Trump making a snark remark towards Kamala Harris, and that will go viral. So it is, because this all, and Natalie, you know it all too well as somebody who's also at the forefront of leading global think tanks, this all has a trickle-down effect to how people believe in democracy, in the political discourse. This is all quite detrimental. And once again, I wish, globally speaking, we could find a way to dial it down a notch, but more often than not, I think the dilemma that we all find ourselves in is this attention-seeking culture and mentality that we're all captured in. And to have civil discussions like these, I think, are indispensable. By the way, I also believe very much in quiet leadership. If you are looking at the countries, the most affluent countries all around the world, at least by GDP per capita, some of those that come to mind are, Switzerland, Norway, Singapore, Ireland, Luxembourg. This is a pretty knowledgeable audience here, but if I went around the room and asked him, who's the president of Switzerland? Who's the prime minister of Norway right now? Even this very distinguished audience would not be able to answer that. And I think that's a healthy thing. I think the focus on leaders and the noise around leaders these days are distracting from the facts, because all of us, and this is my last point, all of us, the ones sitting here in the audience and watching us online, I think we're all searching for a society, and no disrespect obviously to the distinguished ladies and gentlemen here on the stage who have served their nations well, but I think most of us, if not all of us, want to live a life not having to bother and and affected by politics, if you know what I mean. All of us, we wake up in the morning, we want to get by, we want to raise our kids, we want to have a decent income, try to live in more than peaceful times and not be bombarded 24/7 by increasingly authoritarian and loud leaders. And I think the examples that I just noted, Singapore, name me the Prime Minister of Singapore. Few here in this audience could, but certainly one of the most distinguished countries out there as far as political and economic performance are concerned. So loud is not always good, Natalie. Loud is not always good, and I think this is my appeal, generally speaking, as a journalist, obviously, who usually stands where you stand. If we can get back to more civilized debates and focus more on the content that has a trickle-down effect and an impact on my life as a citizen, rather than the next soundbite, I think that would be a first step.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, this also connects to the points that Manish was making about, the physical and the virtual. I mean, we can be and learn to be, and have rules for the physical, but the problem is the rules for the virtual. So rather than having a second round of questions, I do have other questions to all of you, but I'll kind of, blend them into questions from the floor. I really wanted to open this up now, perhaps collect a few questions. Please introduce yourself. I'll take about 3 or 4 questions if we have any from the floor. I assume that there is a microphone. There's a first question over there to my right, and then another one over here, but we'd need a microphone. Microphone. Do we have a microphone? No, or maybe you can come up here in the meantime. Yeah. As things get ready. Yeah, please. Yeah, I mean, we don't have not here.
So I'm General Shukla from India. I was just wondering, one of the reasons for this volatility in the world order is the opera of failing deterrence that we see. You just look at the Middle East. The Houthis have brought down the 9th MQ-9 Reaper, and the mighty Americans. There are CSI studies to say that mighty America doesn't have 7 days of missiles and munitions for a fight in Taiwan. The country that Ali Hassan comes from, Germany, I was reading an article today that at their current rearmament rates, they'll take 100 years to deter Russia. So the question is that why has the West-led order so neglected its deterrence? And President Roosevelt spoke of an arsenal of democracy, that if you have to protect democracies, you must be prepared to invest in deterrence. And I think that is the fundamental reason why these so-called bullies or the aggressors are being encouraged to act. So anyone on the panel would like to react to this? Why has the West-led order failed so miserably in investing in deterrence?
Great. I think that question later, I'll give it to Zig. Other questions? Yeah, please, until we have a mic, which doesn't seem... Yeah, please. Apologies for this. I don't know why we don't have microphones.
Good afternoon. I'm Achal Malhotra, former ambassador of India to Armenia and Georgia. I have a small observation and a very brief question to ask. Well, we are talking about global order or disorder. I think all the fundamental principles which the international community had devised after the World War II, there is nothing wrong with them. Whether it's the principle of sovereignty, territorial integrity, mutual respect, non-interference. The problem is with interpretation, selected approach, and the gap between the rule and the reality. My specific question is, we all talk about that rule of force cannot prevail over the rule of law. But tell me one thing, what is your opinion, any of the panelists? How do you look at the principle of indivisibility of security? Let me elaborate. When one country says, my security is prime, and I don't bother about your security, what do we see? What do we do about it? Specifically, I am referring to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A group of countries says the Ukraine's security is more important than Russia's concern about NATO coming to the backyard of Russia. And the result we all know what has happened. Then we need to understand from the distinguished panelists what prevails over the other. Is it the territorial integrity or the right to self-determination? This conflict between the two concepts, which prevails over the other? So I think in order to give chance to others, I'll stop at these two. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, final question?
Thank you. My name is Rahim Ushakbayev. I am from Astana, Kazakhstan, and my question is to especially our European colleagues from US. How do you perceive Shanghai Organization of Cooperation and especially BRICS? do you see as a kind of rivalry? Because what we see from Central Asia, it looks like the big Eurasia is trying to reunite and fill the gaps. What we see, what we feel in providing the security in Central Asia, in the Eurasian continent. But sometimes it looks like our European colleagues and our US colleagues see it as a kind of reunion around the axis of evil. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me perhaps, Zig, turn to you first. If you can address that first sort of Russia-Ukraine question, and then perhaps the follow-up question, Ali, to you, which was, in a sense, it was more about the kind of, the rules, but the practice the selective application, in a sense, of the rules. But then I have several other questions which I wanted to turn to others. Zig.
Yes, thank you. I must agree with question and why the West neglected investment in its own defense. And I 100% agree with Mr. Trump about it. Although I disagree with most of other things with him, but in this case, yes, either you will pay for your own security or someone else will do, but you might not like it. And in this case, the question for the leaders of developed countries was, do you invest mainly in prosperity and well-being of your society, or you invest in defense and potential war, and program your society, your policy to have a war? So the choice was, we have serious partners that respected for decades laws that we agreed, UN system, OECD, Council of Europe, and so on, and we can trust. I must say that I'm speaking broadly that everyone, but honestly, in Poland was for more than a decade very vocal about the threat from Russian Federation towards its neighbors. I like to say that we are immunized from Russian propaganda by our historical experience, so it's more difficult to deceive us. But you're right. So right now we are improving our defense spending, and because there is no more trust anymore, so we have to build large armies. Poland is spending 4.2% GDP on defense, instead of building universities, instead of helping developing countries in struggle to have a sustained democracy. We have to solve the problem that our neighbor decided to create. And I will make a small bridge to the second question. What is the motivation to attack a neighbor? And is it a territorial intervention or something? I think that Russia is the last country in the world that needs more territory. And this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Ali, can you take the double standards question?
The gentleman from Kazakhstan, about how Europe is perceiving the rise of BRICS Global South. To be quite honest, I mean, if you're Western European or if you're North American, you are ignoring and underestimating this area and union at your own peril. I mean, we're talking about a region, if I'm not mistaken, that is made up of 3.5 billion people. That's almost half of the world's population, I think 45% of global population. And if I'm not mistaken, the last numbers I looked up for one of my moderations, that region makes up 35% of the global economy, increasingly so. So I think I'm from Germany, I'm from Europe, a country and continent that is rapidly aging with severe demographic challenges. You know, I think no one, at least not in Europe, maybe my Polish friend would disagree, we have no illusion that the 21st century will be a European one. It is very clear that whether you're talking about India, you're talking about Brazil, you're talking about Saudi Arabia, all these countries that are on the rise and rightfully want their seat at the table, politically at conferences like these, want their voice to be heard and taken into account. That is something that I certainly, as somebody who's moderating at these conferences, the Munich Security Conference, Natalie, for years was a very transatlantic affair, for instance. It was very Western Europe / North American, and you do see the changes reflected in the discussion. So I'm not sure, to the gentleman who asked the question, I'm not sure they see it as you pointed out, or at least phrased it, axis of evil. I don't think that is not the case. I think BRICS Global South is certainly the dominant, even though very much understanding that it's it's not a homogeneous group in any shape or form, and there are political differences, India and China, even amongst themselves, but it is a force to be reckoned with, and we Europeans better do our homework.
Manish, I actually wanted to come back to you for another question that to mind. I think you rightly said, when you were making the point, whose rules and who made them and who for, and I think that point in and of itself is very well taken. The risk, though, that I would like you to address is, in a sense, the opposite to rules is a world of transactionalism, right? A world where, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to compete or conflict. No, you can make deals, but it's essentially it's a ruleless world, yeah, which perhaps can bring, as I said, certain advantages to certain countries, but I think it has certain inherent risks. And indeed, I think, whereas it's a legitimate criticism to make, especially by those that made the rules, of saying, well, you're trying to preserve something which is kind of, going, wake up to reality. But those that want and that are rising, and I think India really is, probably the prime example, could you reflect a little bit about, how do we avoid the risk of, sort of rethinking the rules in simply morphing into kind of very cynical, in a sense, transactionalism?
Well, I think, Nathalie, you ask a very profound question. See, the difficulty is not so much with the rules. The difficulty is with the selective application of rules.
Which is one of the questions was indeed referring to.
So therefore, if you were to rewind back, those who've made the rules, and obviously because they had the heft and they had the military and the strategic prowess to be able to enforce them, when it comes to their interests, all the rules seem to just go out the window. And I'll give you a very concrete example, addressing the question of deterrence which Gerald Shukla raised. If you were to rewind back to 1994, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. It's another matter whether it had the ability to operationalize that nuclear arsenal, because there is a lot of literature which says that the controls were in Russia. But had Ukraine not been completely defanged by the Budapest Memorandum, and those who gave security guarantees that the sovereignty of Ukraine will be protected, and Ukraine would have possessed those weapons as weapons of deterrence, do you think Russia would have invaded Ukraine? The answer is no. So where are those people who actually defanged Ukraine, gave those security guarantees that your sovereignty is indivisible, it's inviolable? Where are they today? It's another thing that you're willing to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian. But is it what those security guarantees were all about? So therefore, when you talk about a rules-based order, it is the manifest hypocrisy in which these rules have been sought to be enforced. Nobody asks the question, where are those weapons of mass destruction that were supposed to be found in Iraq? What about the whole concept of right to protect? Where does R2P actually give you the right to invade another sovereign country? So I think conceptually, when you are wanting to possibly in this churn try and bring out a better future, this is the time to really reflect on those mistakes and then try and ensure that the rules which are put in place are enforced in an equitable manner. For example, if you look at the United Nations, if the United Nations is still the relevant global body in order to provide a platform for conversations, is the UN really relevant without the other non-governmental stakeholders? Why is it that we missed a golden opportunity time and time again, going back to 2003, to actually have agreed rules of engagement in the virtual space? And today, in our lifetimes, like we saw the rise of the internet, you might see the demise of the internet. You're already seeing the balkanization of the net. China has firewalled the net. It has created a massive intranet. At other places in the world, you have the internet getting defined in terms of cultural values, in terms of spheres of influence. So the point which I am trying to make is that when you talk of a global order in churn, I think it's important to step back, get all the relevant stakeholders, and not only governments, because governments are not the only stakeholders in the new global order, and try and craft something which is equitable, just, and will be enforced impartially.
Thank you. Zoran, on this question of, the selective application of rules, the double standards, in many respects, your country has also been a victim of this, very clearly, in a European context. So perhaps if you could say a few words about how do we go about it? How do you go about it?
Yeah, well, when I was speaking at the beginning for actually the need for a balance of power, actually the world, the multilateralism is not working. We all know that the United Nations is also built after the Second World War, but 5 powers get the right to veto. So the veto power is also within the European Union. The European Union countries have a veto power on vetoing the next candidate on any issue, because as a country candidate for a European Union, we want to actually start the negotiations and be assessed upon standards, European standards, so the Copenhagen criteria, which is rule of law, democracy, human rights, free market. These are the standards for becoming a member of alliance, which is the European Union. But on the other hand, we are blocked by some of our neighbors on bilateral issues, which are issues of identity, denying our right of name, denying our language, for instance. So we made these history commissions with a couple of our neighbors, actually, Bulgaria and Greece, in order to discuss issues of our identity. And these should become, actually, in the end, a right of these countries to veto our accession to European Union. And this is not good. And again, multilateralism is not working in our case. For instance, we had previously, during our negotiations, actually, with our southern neighbor, so we, because they vetoed us to become members of NATO. It was in the late 2008, and we sued them on an international court of justice in Hague, and we got the verdict in our. Actually, we got the verdict that our neighbors should allow us, with the provisional name then in the United Nations, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, to become members of NATO. But they didn't allow us. So not only the big powers, but also the regional powers, but also the countries who are small but but members in these alliances are using this veto, not following the principles. Later on, we agreed to change our name and we became members of NATO. The same was going on, for instance, with the other neighbor. There are 14 verdicts of European Court of Human Rights that our neighbors should actually register the community organizations of Macedonians in Bulgaria, but they are not doing it. So there are these double standards of European Union. This union which actually cherishes democracy, cherishes human rights, but it's not applying these principles to other candidate members, but assessing them in a way which is using these veto powers for bilateral reasons.
Indeed, getting rid of that veto would be a pretty good idea. Susie, I'm not going to close without going back to Susie and Zorab. Susie, in a sense, you've been the most constructive voice on this panel, I would say, because you really put the emphasis on, what is it that, including small countries like your own, can do in order to reinforce multilateralism. And I think you also made a very interesting point about, in the sense, a more regionalized responsibilities in solving problems. So could you perhaps just give us a couple, sort of one minute substantiation of the kind of initiatives that countries like your own, especially in Africa, are taking in order to address the many conflicts in your continent?
Thank you once again. Let me start by making and emphasizing a very important issue that we did not speak about it, but Africa is suffering still the consequences. I believe everybody remembers when Libya was invaded. Libya was invaded exactly because the Western countries believed it hosted terrorists, weapons, but nowadays this invasion is still causing consequences in Africa. My region, which is ECOWAS, that I spoke about, has at the moment 4 countries that are in transition, and we'd say why. I think it's important to explain this. And people start to think these countries, they don't have partnership with countries like France, which are traditional partners. But the main reason is that our countries are suffering of the consequences of the invasion of Libya. The terrorists that were then in Libya, that ran away, they ran away with weapons, and they came down to these African countries, Mali, Niger, and nowadays even Burkina Faso. These countries are really suffering all the consequences of this Western invasion of Libya. And nowadays people are, why African countries are changing their partners? Maybe because many of these African countries realize that unfortunately the trust they had in Western countries was not the best trust. So they are changing for new partners like China, like Turkey, and even like Vietnam, which are not the traditional partners. But because in a way they lost the trust in these traditional partners. And I'm sorry for speaking about it. At the same time, this made us realize that we have to find inside our own regional organization the solutions for our regions, because we realized that the solutions we were having with some partners from Western countries were not the best. And I'm sorry to say, even though they are development partners, they are not making the best bringing the best solutions for Africa. Nowadays, some countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, they can be seen like very developed country with very big economies, because finally they decided to develop internally digital transformation, their own apps, and they're creating really interesting changes and economic transformation in their areas. And we are following up these examples. What's happening is, instead of looking at Western countries now as an example, we start to looking between us, African countries, the example how to develop. And we start looking at the BRICS as an example how to develop. This is just to give you an idea of sometimes the idea of what is best for Africa from the Western country is not really what is best for us African for our development.
Thank you, Susie, for I think those very important words. Zorab, let me end with you and ask you to address Zig's kind of remarks, actually to you, well, not to you, but to Armenia. Given that a lot of this conversation is about the agency that countries, including small countries, have, is this not the time for Armenia to apply for EU membership?
Applying to the EU membership is, in my view, it's a mechanical process. The critical question is the fundamental. The fundamental question is about building the national consensus about the organizing principles in the country, which takes values such as collective freedom, the value of sovereignty, and the organizing principles of the way in which this public, political, economic, social life in the country is built. On that basis, the foreign policy is an instrument of consolidating the national priorities, which are homegrown, which are about the home. With that in mind, I would say, I have always been an advocate, or I was always saying that, believe deeply that democracy in the case of Armenia is not a mere choice of a political system. It's a security issue amongst other things. Yes, personally, I believe that I prefer to be free personally, and I want to be governed by the rule of law in my relations with other free participants in our public life. So, in basic terms, the question of membership in the European Union, of application to the European Union, it's not very much about that actual act.
Sure.
But it's about building such, circles, foreign policy kind of extended engagements which support your national priorities. Because applying to the European Union is a very good thing to do maybe, but there is also one thing, geography. We cannot change geography, and geography has its own realities. So we have to combine one with the other and work out that kind of a strategic, approach in foreign policy, which combines the realities. We have, in the beginning, we have also spoken about the challenges we already have about these global churns, right? So that has also needs to be kind of, factored into our thinking. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to, I've got to close this. Thanks to all of my wonderful panelists. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. And I'm not quite sure how much break we have, but thanks again.
Natalie, I just wanted to say that
he took it.
I still break the system. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
but we have to be disruptive sometimes. I'm really happy that we have a dialogue and we allow to have a voice for powers that are sometimes aggressive, like Russia. But it would be good, I think, for all of us and a country like Armenia to have also a voice of victims. So I hope that at the second edition we'll have a voice, for instance, of Ukrainians as well. I think it would be a lesson for all of us. Just reflection.
Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists and our amazing moderator for this very, very interesting session. And we will move directly to the next session. We have a very quick technical check, and then we will move to our next session. We have all our speakers here already. Please remain seated.
Mr. Greg. Hi, hello, mic check, 1, 2. Hi, mic check, 1, 2, okay? Hello, 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 mic check, 1, 2. Which one?
moderator and the speakers on the stage, please. Charlie? Thank you all. We move to the next session, Climate Security in the Era of Uncertainty. And we have with us our moderator, Shaili Kedia, Senior Fellow and Associate Director with the Energy and Resource Institute of India. Could I request my colleagues to play the slide with Shaili's designation? Thank you. Next, we have our Minister from India, His Excellency Kirti Vardhan Singh, Minister of State for Environment, Forest, Climate Change, and Minister of State for External Affairs, India. Sir, would you join us on the stage, please? We have Mr. Dimitri Mariasin, who is the Deputy Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Dimitri, would we have you on stage? Perfect. Next, we have Joshua Wycliffe, who's the Chief of Operations with the International Solar Alliance. Joshua? We have Fabrice Bolange, Associate Professor and Research Director with the University of Lyon from France, joining us. And last, we have Victoria Panova, who's the Head of BRICS Expert Council, the Vice Rector at HSC University, and the Sherpa for the W20 from Russia, joining us. Thank you all for joining us, and Shaili, over to you, please.
Thank you so much. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizers for bringing us all together. Very good afternoon, distinguished delegates. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's session on climate